welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. It isn't just higher wages for nurses that will help make patients safer. 7,000 nurses walked out of their jobs in protest in New York on Saturday, saying the healthcare system needs much more from the government. Today we discuss why they are on strike. Japan, despite local opposition, plans to expand US military presence in the archipelago. We look at the road the US-Japan security alliance has taken and its implications for the region. Thailand's next election may see plenty of jostling for power. Prime Minister Prayut has joined a new political party. We discuss its significance for Thailand's upcoming election. Nurses in New York want staffing issues fixed. That's why they are on strike, they say, and they cannot care for double or even higher numbers of patients than they are trained and equipped to handle. Nurses are in severe burnout, which didn't begin with the pandemic, though it worsened the situation for them. Negotiations with the management are ongoing. Natalia joins us from New York with the latest news of the strike. Thanks for joining us, Natalia. Natalia, you've been covering this strike. Can you tell us what the nurses' demands are? And, also we read these reports which say that nurses have burnout. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so nurses right now are on strike. About 7,000 or over 7,000 nurses are on strike in New York City at Mount Sinai Hospital and Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. Their main demands are around safe patient-to-nurse staffing ratios and higher wages. Nurses are saying that they have to deal with, 17 patients in the ICU, something crazy like that. Too many patients to really adequately take care of. And it's making, it's creating an unsafe situation for both the patients and the nurses as well, who could lose their license because of this. And, it's actually against New York state law for, ratios this high to exist. But, that law has not been enforced since it was passed in 2021. And the nurses are demanding that those staffing ratio laws be enforced in the major hospitals in New York City, which has not been the case. And also, hospital bosses will say that, enforcing these staffing ratios is impossible because of the shortage of nurses in the US. And nurses are answering that, really, if nurses are paid more and treated better, and, there isn't such a high stress environment in terms of these patient to staff ratios, then they can actually stay in the profession. Right now, nurses are leaving the profession in droves. It's predicted that, 2/3 of nurses will leave the profession very soon. And really a lot of the reason is due to the low pay and high stress. And nurses are saying that there are very easy, straightforward ways for hospital bosses to invest more money in fixing these issues, but they simply choose not to.
Okay, Natalia. Now, what about the negotiations that have been ongoing between the nurses and the various hospital managements? And also, how long will these strikes continue? What does it look like right now?
Yeah, so initially, there are around 17,000 nurses that are organized under NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association, the union that's leading the strikes. Initially, basically all 17,000 or almost all 17,000 had voted to approve a strike. 98.8%, just a ridiculous amount of nurses were really fed up and wanted to strike. And if 17,000 nurses walk off the job in New York City, one of the most populated cities in the planet, that's a huge issue. That's a massive issue. So 8 different hospitals were to be involved in the strike. And at the majority of those hospitals, they rapidly scrambled once the new year began to form tentative agreements with the nurses and finally actually give them the things that they had been demanding in the contract negotiations. Contracts expired, I believe, around December 31st. And so, all of a sudden, all these hospitals are like, these nurses really mean business. We need to go sit down with them. That happened at all but two hospitals. So currently the strike is only happening at the two hospitals that I mentioned because those two hospitals are not giving nurses, according to NISNA, they're walking off negotiations, they're leaving the negotiating table. They're not giving nurses the demands that they're asking for. And so right now, indefinitely, over 7,000 nurses at those two hospitals are on strike. According to NISNA, they keep trying to negotiate with the hospitals. They're not giving them what they need. Mount Sinai went to such great lengths as to transfer infants to different hospitals, make all these different arrangements. NISNA is saying, unionized nurses are saying that all of the different arrangements that Mount Sinai and Montefiore are making to accommodate for the strike, hiring temporary travel nurses, which are paid higher than regular nurses, transferring patients, transferring infants, all that money spent could be used to pay nurses more and just give them their demands, especially because travel nurses are more expensive.
Okay, Natalia, thanks a lot for that update. Despite local opposition, the United States is set to scatter its military presence across Japan. Reports say that a long-planned expansion of US military presence throughout the island is expected after a Wednesday meeting between the defense and foreign ministers of Japan and US officials. The contentious plan was outlined in 2020. Let's go over to Anish from People's Dispatch on what kind of reorganization of US forces it might involve and the regional implications. Thanks for joining us, Anish. Anish, can you tell us about the plan and whatever details we have of it so far?
Yes, so if you talk about the immediate plan of creating a new sort of marine unit within the United States, within Japan, the U.S. plan is to create what it will call as the Marine Littoral Regiment, which will be basically smaller units that is spread across the Japanese archipelago. And that will include about, as from the reports that we have so far, it will include about 1,800 to 2,000 Marines. And Marines are a very specific group of, for those who do not know, are a very specific group of specialized group of US armed forces. And so, and Japan hosts the largest number of Marines outside of the United States, with around 18,000 of them present right now, mostly around Okinawa. And we have talked about Okinawa quite a bit on this show before about the US military presence on the island and how it has stoked local resentment for various reasons. So this case, while there is, this immediate plan, which has not been announced yet, we have to remember, it has to be announced after discussions with the Japanese ministers. But the fact that it is being sped up right now, and there is a clear-cut timeline of finishing it by 2026, shows that the US is ramping up the older, sort of 2020 plan that was unveiled by the US Armed Forces in Japan, and that is to actually expand US military presence across Japan, and not just like it kind of tries to mask it under the fact that because there is local resentment in Okinawa, it is trying to cut that down, cut the presence there by transferring armed forces in different parts of the country. But that will only mean that there will be an expanded and a more comprehensive US military presence across the country, rather than being concentrated on one part of the country. And that will obviously not be taken with the same kind of, it's not just where we're talking about resentment that can be happening, but there can also be issues that may come up because obviously you need to have land. Many of these planned bases will be in Japanese military bases, and that will also have its own issues. And all of this is obviously being done under the US-Japan military agreements that were signed in the 1950s before the Japanese constitution was made. But it is definitely not something that a lot of Japanese view quite favorably. And that can obviously mean that in the next few years, we can see more resentment and discontent against the US military.
Anish, can you also just dwell a little bit into more detail on how Japanese people might react to this plan and also beyond Japan in the region?
Yes, so beginning with Japan, like while there has been quite a lot of a general sort of consensus among Japanese people that the burden that is being placed on Okinawa with the U.S. military bases need to be spread out further, because a lot of Japanese, you have to remember, do not view the U.S. or the U.S. military presence in Okinawa unfavorably so far, because most of them obviously do not live next to the any of the military bases. Uh, but when it comes to, like, we have seen opinion polls that asked clearly, would they be viewing it favorably if they have a military base or U.S. military base or presence near their hometown, and that was generally seen as by a majority seen as not favorable, or there were not very positive responses coming in that part. So obviously, the Japanese people would want the U.S. to be to continue in Japan, but they're not very keen on having them on their own backyard, and that can obviously and this is even before any of this plan was suggested. So what we are seeing right now is that a possible mass discontent can happen in the next future, because we have obviously seen the kind of immunity that is afforded to U.S. forces in Japan, as whenever there are issues that come up, and we have seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Okinawan bases were pretty much one of the reasons for a massive spike in infections in the country, and before that there were several crimes that were committed by U.S. soldiers, which received very little to almost no consequences whatsoever within the Japanese legal system, has obviously had very popular anger, attracting attacking the U.S. forces. But in this case, if this sort of continues and expands across the country, we can see that sort of anger also likely to be spread out. On the other hand, we have to remember, as you pointed out, this is a part of the whole encirclement policy that the U.S. military is right now putting against China, and this is also part of transferring a large number of Marines to places like Guam, to places like Hawaii. What they fear to be like to cut down on China's influence in the Pacific. And that also has its own issues, because thousands are being, are planned to be transferred to these regions, and also Okinawa. And that can, in fact, have a bigger repercussion, because we are already seeing tensions to be soaring in the region. And, this sort of expansion plan that would, with a very clear intention to cut down, a clear access to the Pacific for China, means that the US is pretty much just preparing for confrontations in the near future.
Right, Anish, thanks for joining us with that update. Thailand is preparing for a general election in 2023, and dramatic developments are unfolding in the country. The increasingly unpopular Prime Minister Prayut joined the new United Thai Nation Party on Monday. Prayut seeks re-election as the party's prime ministerial candidate in the May election, but a constitutional term limit would not allow him to serve a complete tenure even if he returns to the post. Anish again has the details of the developments. Let's return to him. Anish, can you talk about Prayut's new bid for prime ministership? What led to this development?
Well, we have to remember that for a long time now, more than a year now, there has been internal conflicts developing within the Palang Pracharat party, which is the ruling party right now, and which has supported Prayut's prime ministership so far within the parliament. So, with the power tussle that actually unraveled, and especially when we spoke about when Prayut was asked to step down by the Constitutional Court over the verdict for his term limit, and obviously he came back to the prime ministership. But even within that period, you saw the Palang Pracharat party being, divided on how to deal with that case. And there were many within the leadership of that party who wanted to use that as an opportunity to create a new leadership and probably a new prime ministerial candidate for the upcoming election. And this also has a lot to do with the sort of popular upheaval that has been happening over the past more than 2 years now against Prayut Chan-o-cha, against his sort of like a civic military alliance sort of government that has been in place since 2014 and since the coup actually. And so that shows that the popular anger against him and his government, and allegations of corruption that have come up, allegations of mismanaging the pandemic in the later stages and the later waves that have actually hit the country, allegations of abuse of activists, human rights abuses against activists and students especially, who led a large part of the Bangkok chapter of the protest, as we saw. All of that definitely impacted how the ruling party was reacting at the time. And the culmination of this is essentially Prayut just leaving the party at this point. Well, he has not officially left it, but the fact that he has joined a new party with no representative or elected legislator shows that he is definitely, he does not see a future within his own party, a party that was created to prop up the sort of or continue the military dictatorship that came up in the 2014 coup, is being abandoned by Prayut so that he can continue with his hold on power. We have to remember that Prayut is, again, despite the fact that he was allowed to continue for the next couple of years by the Constitutional Court with a very contentious reading of what term, since when the term limit actually applied to Prayut Chan-o-cha, he can not serve the entirety of his tenure even if he gets re-elected. But there is also the fact that there is a massive anger and also unpopularity that Prayut has to really deal with. He has been trailing in several opinion polls, and this is only essentially a desperate attempt in many ways for him to continue his hold on power.
Anish, will it actually affect the outcome of the elections?
We need to wait and see, because obviously it's too soon right now. We do not have the data to actually, read the charts, as they say. But in the coming months, the last few months, we have actually seen Prayut's popularity declining to abysmal levels, to single digits at this point, and he's a very distant second right now, far behind Thaksin Shinawatра's daughter, who is right now currently trying to lead the Pheu Thai party and will be contesting for the prime ministership in the upcoming election in May. And that shows that obviously all that popular anger and protest have actually affected the way people perceive the current government. But here's the thing, it is not as simple as winning an election or winning a majority even in the parliament or the lower house of the parliament, because the way the prime minister is elected in the current constitution is that it has to be a majority that combines both the Senate and the lower house of the parliament. And the Senate is essentially military appointees who favor Prayut no matter what. So that is also one of the reasons why he actually won the election, in the sense that despite losing a majority in the lower house. So this sort of complicated process actually makes it difficult for any kind of opposition party to claim their stake in the government if they do not have a super majority in the lower house to balance out the Senate members and their votes. So these factors are definitely going to be affecting no matter what the results are. And so if there is only a small, and we have to remember that at this point, there are large parties that are competing for the similar kind of constituency. And this is not going to be the same kind of election that Thailand had seen in the past several decades, where you had very clear, almost a divided, a bipolar sort of contest in many instances between the more pro-democratic forces and the more monarchist and pro-military political forces. And at this point, we have multiple parties claiming these two different poles and their constituencies at the same time, including not only Prayut's new party, but also the oldest party, which is the Democratic Party, and the Palang Prasidenth Party on one hand, and then there is obviously Pheu and the Move Forward Party, and then there are other groups that are also claiming for the progressive and the pro-democratic votes on the other hand. So this is going to be a very complicated election, and we have always seen in such first past the post contests that popularity doesn't necessarily mean a victory or even a clear majority in the upcoming election. So we need to really wait and see how things unravel in the next coming months.
Right, Anish, and thanks for that update. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. We'll return tomorrow with more stories from around the world. Until then, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and more regular updates are available on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.